In this recording, I'd like to talk about parameter queries. Parameter queries add an extra level of flexibility to your queries. You don't have to know the criteria that your query needs to meet when you design it. You can allow the user to enter it as we go. For instance, in the last recording, I created this query called Query Pizzas. And if you weren't following along with the last recording, you can simplify this query. It's got some calculated fields in it, but really what we need from the customer lookup table is the name, the order date, and the size. And I think that's kind of all I'm going to be worried about, maybe the toppings. So if you don't have this one, maybe you won't be able to follow along. But if you have it from the previous ones, we're using that one. I'm going to use this query as the foundation for my next query. So I'm going to create a new query in design mode, and I'm going to base it on another query. And I talked about this in the last recording, in recording number 2 for Unit 2, that you can create queries based on other queries. Now there's a limit to how many of those you can chain together, but I've never reached it, so it's pretty expansive. So I want to use this pizzas query, and it has all these fields, and I can bring them all in, and the easy way to bring them all in is to double click on the query name and then drag any one of these down here, and they each get their own column. And if I run it, I get the same results, but without the formulas. There's no formulas in this query. The formulas are all in the other query. This is just using fields. And remember, I created formulas that calculated the coupon percent, that figured out which toppings the person was using, and so on. And now as an example of a parameter query, let's say that the bosses want to be able to say, show me just the large pizza orders. I want to analyze those. Show me just the medium pizza orders. I want to analyze those, but they can't quite make up their mind. Now we could create 4 different queries, one for small, medium, and large, but imagine we had 10 different sizes and we could have 10 different queries and so on. Much easier to use a parameter query. Parameter queries are very easy to create. In the criteria box, using square brackets, and this is the key, you have to have the square brackets, you put in a question or command to enter the size. You could also say, what size would you like? I like to put a colon at the end, think it just looks good, and then when we run this, we get a parameter box that allows us to enter the size. Right now in the last recording, I made a mistake and mistyped one of the field names. We got this parameter box. I wasn't expecting it. That's an error that needs to be corrected. In this case, because it's a parameter query, I'm expecting the parameter box. And I can type whatever I want here, like large, don't even have to capitalize it, right? And now I get just the large pizzas. Okay. And if I want to, I can refresh this, and this is something I don't mention too much I don't mention it at all in the book, is using this button you can refresh it. What the book has you do is go back to design mode, run it again, and then it'll ask you for that parameter value again. I can refresh, and there's my parameter value, and I can say, show me the small pizzas. And now I get just the smalls. One trick that the book does show you that I think is pretty impressive is what happens if I leave this blank. If I leave it blank, I get nothing. What the authors of the book contend is if you leave it blank, you probably mean you want all the pizzas again, all the sizes. How do you deal with that? The way the book shows you to do it is really quite simple. I'm going to go to the builder and I'll zoom in so that you can see it. It looks like my builder zoomed in just a little too far here. Okay. Now for the size, there's the parameter. What they recommend you do is add a wildcard character to that. Unfortunately, in this case, you can't just put a star inside the square brackets. Remember from the unit or tutorial 3 beginning access, you learned about wildcard characters. The wildcard character represents any character, okay? And normally you just stick it at the end of some text. However, in this case, we can't do that because the parameter is there. We have to concatenate the wildcard character. Also remember when you're doing wildcard characters that Access automatically adds the SQL keyword like to the beginning of the query. That's not going to happen automatically here because this is a parameter query mixed with a criteria, so we have to add the word like ourselves. And that's all we have to do. Click on OK. And so now what happens if I enter large, this becomes like large star. If I enter small, this becomes like small star, and it'll give us all the larges and the smalls. But if I leave it blank, it just becomes like star. The star represents anything, and we should get all of our sizes. So let's make sure that the small still works. Yep. And as a matter of fact, now that we have that, now that we have that criteria in there, I can just do an S. And with my criteria, like S star, this will give me all the smalls. So I don't even have to type small. But most people don't recognize that or know that. Once again, I'm going to refresh, but this time I'm going to leave that blank, click on OK, and now I get all of them again, all 425 pizza orders that I have. So that's how you do parameter queries. Really pretty simple. The book mentions it briefly but doesn't demonstrate it. What if I also wanted to do, let's do another query. I'm going to take this one out. On toppings. I want the user to be able to enter some toppings, and I'm going to tell them whether those toppings exist, which orders included these toppings. Now this would be very hard to do using just the checkboxes. Right? One of the things you can't do in a parameter query is designate that I want pizzas with mushrooms in a parameter query. Right? But because we have this calculated field that mixes all of the toppings into one field, we can do it. I'm going to start with my like, so if the user again leaves this blank, it gives them all the toppings. But in this case, I don't quite know where the mushrooms, the pepperoni, the sausage, where it's going to be, at the end, at the beginning, in the middle, so I need to handle all of those. So I'm going to start with like star, and then I'm going to concatenate to that my prompt for the parameter, enter a topping, and concatenate the star at the end. So now what I'm getting is star, mushroom, star. That means if it's got mushrooms anywhere, at the beginning, at the end, because remember the star can also represent nothing. The asterisk can represent nothing. And so this will handle mushrooms regardless of where they are. At the beginning, at the end, in the middle, should find them. So let's see how that works. Enter a topping, let's do mushrooms. And I get mushrooms, mushrooms. Every one of these orders has got mushrooms. Notice here it's at the beginning. Here it's in the middle. Here it's at the beginning and the end. It's all on. Here it's at the end. It works regardless of where it is. It's a very common query. Like, star, some value, and then another star. Let's refresh that and look for pepperoni. Again, capitalization doesn't matter. Because of the way we wrote our calculated field, pepperoni always appears at the beginning, but it still works. And if I wanted to, I could say, show me the green peppers, and I'm just going to say green. If it's got green in it, I'm going to see it. Right, so there's the green peppers, green peppers, green peppers all over the place. The one thing to be careful of here is what if I searched for pepperoni by just doing pep? Everything's cool, except if we scroll through here, here's one with sausage, mushrooms, and green pepper. That's not what I wanted, so I have to be careful. But I can refresh it and start over again. And then the other thing we wanted to test is what if I leave it blank? I get 425 pizza orders. So that's how parameter queries work. The book does mention briefly, but doesn't go into it in too much detail, that you can put in multiple parameters. Now I took this size parameter and removed it. I'm going to put it back again. I cut and pasted it. Now I have two parameters. You can have as many parameters as you want. When I run the query, it first asks me for the first parameter, left to right. If you want them asked in a certain order, make sure you put them in there left to right. And so let's say that I want medium pizzas that have mushrooms on them. Now you have to meet both criteria, because if we look at the query, and let's take a look at this real quick, but notice they're all medium and they all have mushrooms in them. I hope, yep. They all have mushrooms in them. I can see that there's 56. I can see that rarely do people order mushrooms all by themselves. And I can then analyze the coupons, and I can do all kinds of other stuff here. But the point here is you can have multiple queries. Because the queries are in the same criteria row, they're treated as an AND condition. You must meet this criteria and that criteria. If I wanted it to be an OR condition where they meet the size criteria or the toppings criteria, I move this down to a second row. But when you have multiple parameters, you get multiple parameter boxes that appear in the order that they appear in the query, and they're both applied to your query results. So it lets you create some very, very flexible queries.